Tall trees line the narrow path, their trunks dark and rough, bark flaking in delicate sheets. Moss clings thickly to the lower branches, and tiny ferns spring from the base of the roots. The ground is soft, carpeted with dead leaves, and the occasional cluster of pale mushrooms that lean towards whatever bits of light that scatters through the canopy. A thin stream runs parallel to your path. Its water is smooth and clear, tumbling over small stones, the surfaces broken by smooth pebbles, creating miniature waves and soft ripples. Occasional small shadows move across the water, leaving faint trails in as they move and disappear down the stream. Sunlight falls in scattered shafts around you, narrow strips that illuminate dust particles drifting lazily in the air. The light hits the leaves at odd angles, making them glow with faint golden and green undertones. A low mist clings to the ground in patches, softening edges and giving depth to the spaces between the trees. The forest floor is covered with green moss creeping up the trees. You watch a brown leaf tremble as it falls from the tree above. The branches shake briefly as a squirrel moves along the tree. The sounds of this place are gentle. The trickle of water, the rustle of leaves, the distant song of a bird hidden somewhere in the canopy. Further down the path slopes gently upward, winding through a line of birch trees whose white bark gleams softly in the pale light. Their leaves flutter in delicate waves, revealing glimpses of the pale sky above. Fallen leaves create a quilt of amber and gold under your feet, muffling your steps and softening your pace. A faint smell of damp earth rises as you pass by thick roots twisted above the soil. Small plants sprout in irregular clusters, their leaves catching what little sunlight filters through the high branches. Occasionally, the branch sways and drops a tiny twig, which lands with a muted tap. The stream from nearby widens briefly, flowing slowly over rounded stones that gleam wetly. Reflections of the trees shimmer on the surface, breaking into fragmented patterns with each ripple. Tiny bubbles rise and pop as water cascades over small ridges, and the sound blends seamlessly with the distant rustle of the leaves. Further along, the trees thin slightly, revealing a low hill in the distance covered in green grass and wildflowers. Sunlight flickers across the undergrowth, and shadows stretch and shift as the wind passes through the upper canopy. Small birds flit between branches, their wings sending faint rustling sounds through the calm air. Ahead, a slope levels into a narrow clearing where grass grows tall and soft, bending gently underfoot. Patches of moss cling to the base of scattered oaks, and the ground is dotted with pale flowers that tilt towards the soft light. Faint dew beads are on the leaves, catching the light in tiny, fleeting directions. The stream nearby narrows, sliding gently over smooth stones. Its edges are lined with reeds that quiver with each gust of wind, and dragonflies hover just above the surface, wings catching the light in flashes of iridescent blue and green. Occasional ripples scatter the reflections of the surrounding trees, creating shifting, ephemeral patterns. The trees arch overhead, their branches forming canopies that filter light in unpredictable ways. Bark textures vary around you, rough ridges, smooth patches, delicate mosses. The shadows play across them, elongating and shortening with every movement of the sun. Tiny plants with curling leaves bring form the base of tree trunks, seeming almost to lean towards your path. At the end, you see a clearing. A slight rise reveals a distant copse of evergreen trees. Their dark, needle-covered branches contrast with the soft, bright greens of the surrounding undergrowth. A gentle breeze carries a faint pine scent, and the air feels slightly cooler here, as though the trees themselves are holding it in quiet, odd pockets. Your path narrows, winding between tall pines whose branches are heavy with clusters of cones. Needles litter the ground around you, softening the steps and exhaling a faint resinous scent with each movement. Sunlight drifts through the branches, catching on loose needles and dust particles, creating tiny flickering points of light along the path. A trickle of water passes under a fallen log, pooling briefly before disappearing into the soft earth. The bark of the log is molted with lichen and tiny fungi, subtle textures that seem to pulse under close observation. Small insects crawl along its surface, moving with quiet deliberation. Alongside your path, a steep bank rises slightly, covered in thick moss and scattered ferns. Thin roots curl around some exposed, creating delicate, intricate patterns in the soil. Tiny flowers blossom along the moss, petals soft and translucent in the pale light. A bird's song punctuates the quiet rhythm of the forest. A jay calls somewhere unseen, and a faint rustle signals a squirrel leaping from branch to branch. Light shifts slowly, shadows deepening and then retreating, revealing textures and details you haven't noticed. Each step you take reveals new, intricate pieces of this dense, living world of trees. Beyond the tree, your path dips into a gentle hollow where sunlight filters like pale gold, catching the surface of tiny puddles left by last night's rain. Moss clings thickly to stones, soft and velvet beneath your feet. Fallen leaves and shades of amber rustle softly under each step, occasionally releasing a faint earthly smell. The stream widens here, curving around small mounds of earth, exposing smooth stones coated in wet green algae. Reflections of the overhanging branches shimmer and break apart as the water flows past. Tiny insects hover above the surface, wings catching glints of light that scatters across the moving current. Trees arch overhead with twisted, irregular branches, their bark textured with patches of lichen and moss. Between them, slivers of sky appear as pale blue lines fading into the soft, filtered light. Delicate tendrils of vines trail along the branches, some dropping thin leaves that flutter briefly before settling into the forest floor. Along the bank, a small fern uncurls its spirals, and the bases of the trees are dotted with tiny mushrooms in soft yellows and pale browns. A faint breeze moves through, shaking loose pine needles and sending them drifting lazily down. Every steep footstep you take feels absorbed in the forest's slow, intricate rhythm. Your path rises gradually, covered in bracken that sweeps in gentle waves with each breath of wind. Dappled sunlight touches the upper fronds, turning them golden at the edges, while shadows linger in the hollows beneath. You notice the air is tinged with the faint aroma of resin and wet earth. A narrow rivulet runs beside your path, cutting through tufts of grass and moss. Water bubbles over tiny stones, and faint ripples scatter reflections of the overhanging branches. Small dragonflies dart across the surface, their wings catching glimmers of pale sunlight before vanishing into the foliage. Trees of varying species crowd your path, trunks rough, some pitted with old scars, others smooth and silvered with age. Ivy winds delicately around the bases, clinging tightly and sending out thin, twisted tendrils. Fallen twigs and pine cones dot the ground, each one catching the light differently, forming a subtle mosaic beneath your feet. The soundscape is minimal, yet intricate. A distant rustle as a bird lifts off, a gentle gurgle of water, the whisper of wind through the leaves. Tiny details emerge, the shimmer of moisture on a leaf, the rough pattern of the bark, the glint of a whetstone. Each step you take reveals new textures and new forms. The forest opens slightly into a glade where sunlight spills in more generously, touching low shrubs and tufts of grass. The ground is softer here, and the air smells faintly of flowers mixed with the earthly tang of wet soil. Tiny insects drift lazily in shafts of light, their wings catching faint gleams. A small pool is formed in a depression, perfectly still, except for the occasional ripple caused by a falling leaf. The water is clear, reflecting the arching branches above in fractured, delicate patterns. Patches of moss cling around the edge, pale green against the dark stones. The surrounding trees are spaced oddly, their branches forming intricate, laced artwork overhead. Thin vines spiral upward along the trunks, while delicate shoots emerge from the base, curling in tiny, precise spirals. Shadows shift gradually with the sun, elongating across the soft, uneven ground. Occasional movement catches your eye. A squirrel darts across the clearing. A bird jumps from branch to branch, and a butterfly glimmers briefly before vanishing. Each element is sharp in its detail. Leaf textures, rough bark, water reflecting light, a tapestry of subtle, living motion. The path narrows again as it curves along the slight rise, lined with saplings and low shrubs. Fallen leaves crunch lightly under your feet, revealing faint patterns of veins and imperfections. Light drifts through the branches and narrow shafts, illuminating small patches of moss and lichen in irregular shapes. A shallow stream runs along the path, water rippling over pebbles and tiny ridges and miniature cascades. Reflections of the trees shimmer on the surface, breaking with every tiny ripple. Occasional insects skim across, leaving faint trails in the mirrored light. Trees arch overhead, some twisted and gnarled, some smooth and upright, forming a twisted canopy. Delicate tendrils of climbing plants snake upward along the trunks, and soft moss clings to every nook. A faint breeze shifts, moving leaves and branches, creating patterns of a shadow that move across your path. Along the banks, you see tiny mushrooms in dull whites, yellows, clustered in the crevices of the rocks, and a small fern unfurls slowly, revealing curled tendrils beneath. The subtle interplay of light and movement creates an ever-changing visual tapestry underneath you and above. Your path flattens into a soft, grassy expanse, dotted with scattered stones and low shrubs. Sunlight touches the tips of the grass, turning them pale gold, and their shadows waver behind them. The air smells faintly sweet, with the subtle fragrance of wildflowers hidden among the undergrowth. A thin stream glimmers to one side, moving over smooth, dark stones and creating soft, melodic ripples. Tiny bubbles form and vanish, and occasional reflections of leaves float across the surface, breaking in slow, delicate patterns. Small insects hover briefly before darting elsewhere. The surrounding trees are irregular in shape and size. Bark seems to range from deep fissures to smooth, silvered surfaces, while roots twist above the ground in intricate networks. Vines trail along the trunks, and fallen branches lie scattered, partially covered in moss. You see the swaying grass, the slight tremors of leaves in the breeze, the flash of a bird's wing, the shimmer of moisture on a stone as it drops into a nearby unfurled fern. The path climbs gently, bordered by dense clusters of ferns and low shrubs. Soft light drifts through the canopy in thin beams, catching droplets of dew and illuminating them in tiny glimmers. Fallen leaves rustle under your feet, some dry and crisp, and others soft and damp, each adding texture to your journey. The stream narrows again, running quietly between banks dotted with moss and tiny plants. Water trickles over stones and roots, forming miniature ripples that catch glints of the pale sunlight. Insects move across the surface, occasionally dipping to touch the water before lifting up again and moving on. Trees tower overhead, their trunks twisted and bark rough to the touch. Thin vines spiral upward, clinging tightly to branches and weaving delicate, unpredictable patterns. Shadows lengthen as the sun shifts, revealing small flowers and ferns and mosses previously hidden. Along the edge of the path, mushroom clusters and earthy clumps and tiny stems of new plants push through the cluttered leaves. Your path widens slightly into a soft clearing where the grass grows thick and pale with morning dew. Each blade catches the light differently, shimmering in tiny variations of green and gold. Small stones and twigs lie scattered, each one casting subtle shadows on the damp earth. The stream meanders beside the path, water smooth and glassy, occasionally breaking into gentle ripples over pebbles. Reflections of trees shimmer in soft distortion, while the surface occasionally disrupts with a falling leaf or skimming insect. Trees lean, their bark dark and molted, roots spiraling over ground in intricate networks. Moss and lichen cling in patches, contrasting with the smooth sheen of the exposed wood. The interplay of light and shadow creates constant shifting textures on every surface. Along the edge of the clearing, low shrubs and ferns undulate gently in the breeze. Tiny flowers peek through the greenery, pale and delicate, while birds move among the branches, occasionally stirring the leaves in soft, whispering rustles. Your path curves sharply upward, lined with clusters of birches with silvered bark. Fallen leaves create a patchwork of amber and brown, some soft and damp, others crisp. Tiny twigs and pine needles scatter underfoot, adding texture to the uneven ground. A small stream cuts across the path in a shallow, clear ribbon. Water ripples over smooth stones, creating miniature reflections of overhanging branches. Insects hover and dart, wings catching light in quick flashes of iridescence. Sunlight filters through the gaps of the canopy, illuminating small patches of moss and tiny flowers. Each detail is crisp, the vein of the leaf, the texture of the bark, the faint shimmer of dew on a leaf. Shadows shift slowly as the day goes on, elongating and retreating in soft waves. The surrounding trees lean at odd angles, creating narrow corridors that open and close with each step. Vines spiral along trunks and branches, delicate and unpredictable. A gentle breeze passes through, shifting leaves and creating subtle rustling and ever-changing rhythm beneath the towering woods. The forest thins slightly here, opening into a grassy slope dotted with small stones and low shrubs. Pale sunlight spills over the terrain, catching the edges of leaves and creating tiny glints. Moss carpets the base of the trees, and stones. The stream slows and widens here, reflecting fragments of images from the trees and their mixed patterns. Small ripples break the surface, disrupted by insects or occasional drops of moisture falling from overhead. The water's movement is hypnotic in its delicate undulations. The trees nearby seem gnarled and twisted, each with unique textures and marks, ranging from deep fissures to smooth patches, often flecked with lichen. Roots curl and spiral across the ground, forming intricate networks that create natural obstacles and hidden pockets of moss and flowers. Shadows stretch and bend across the slope, blending with pale sunlight and ever-changing mosaics. You see tiny movements, a leaf trembling on a branch, a fern unfurling, the brief shimmer of water in an insect's wings. Every element seems alive, inviting careful attention to the textures of the forest. You open the door. The path climbs gently along a ridge, bordered by clusters of ferns and saplings. The ground is soft and uneven, covered with pine needles, fallen leaves, and the occasional small stones. Sunlight drifts through the branches in narrow beams, illuminating fragments of moss and tiny stems. The stream flows on a parallel course with yours, widening into shallow pools that glimmer with subtle reflection of the overhanging trees. Occasional insects skim the water, breaking the surface and creating delicate ripples that scatter the light. Tall trees rise sporadically on either side of your path. Bark textures vary from rough and fissured to smooth and silvery, some with moss clinging in patches, Thin vines spiral along their trunks, and small plants push through the soil, curling their tender shoots towards the light. The air carries faint scents of damp earth and moss and pine. The gentle rustling of leaves, soft ripple of water, blended with the occasional bird call. You look out to the bird, then you see a door. The path descends slightly, curving among thick oaks and low undergrowth. The ground is soft and springy, layered with fallen leaves and moss. Small stones and roots occasionally rise through the soil, requiring careful, observed steps. A narrow stream winds along the path, water shallow and clear, slipping over stones and around roots. Occasional ripples break the mirrored surface, and insects hover briefly before darting to another leaf or branch. The sound is gentle, rhythmic, and immersive. The trees lean aimlessly, forming a soft canopy overhead. Bark is rough in places, smooth in others, and moss clings in occasional patches. Vines trail along branches and trunks, twisting unpredictably, and delicate ferns push upward at the bases of the older trees. Pale light filters through gaps in the leaves, creating shifting patterns across your path. Tiny flowers and mushrooms and mossy textures catch your eye. Each one you see is unique. Birds flit quietly among branches. A squirrel moves swiftly along a trunk, and the forest reveals its intricate details with every careful step. Your path curves into a small hollow where the ground is softer and the grass is interspersed with small moss patches. The stream widens slightly, its clear water moving lazily over smooth stones. Shadows of trees ripple across its surface, and the slow movement of the breeze passes by. The trunks around the hollow vary in shape, some twisted and gnarled, others straight and slender. Bark textures differ remarkably, from deep fissures to pale, smooth, often decorated with lichen and moss. Roots coiled above the ground, forming irregular, unnatural patterns. Sunlight filters through leaves in narrow beams, catching floating dust as it glistens on a dew-laden fern. Small flowers poke through the moss and leaves, that clutter the floor, delicate and translucent. The forest floor is dotted with scattered twigs and pine cones and little creatures, each detail vivid under careful observation. A soft wind rustles the leaves overhead, sending dappled shadows across the stones and grass. Birds sing intermittently, insects hum faintly, and water ripples gently. Your path rises slightly, cutting through dense undergrowth and clusters of young saplings. Fallen leaves carpet the ground in irregular patterns of gold and amber and brown, each one showing veins and imperfections. The soil beneath is dark and slightly damp, pressing softly under your feet. The stream runs close to the path, winding around mossy stones and fallen branches. Its surface reflects fractured images of the trees above, shifting gently with every ripple. Tiny insects skim across, their wings catching sunlight in brief flashes. Tree trunks arch overhead, oddly formed and gnarled, with rough bark, scattered patches of moss, with vines coiled around them, curling in delicate spirals, while ferns and seedlings push from the forest floor. The wind shifts, stirring leaves and creating subtle patterns of light and shadow. Along the edges of the path, you see tiny mushrooms clustered in shaded patches, and small flowers trying to peek through the moss. Birds and small creatures move quietly in the distance, leaving only a trace of subtle leaves rustling nearby. The forest slopes in an open area where grass grows tall and thick among scattered stones. Sunlight filters through high branches, illuminating moss patches and delicate curling of ferns. Leaves litter the ground, softening each step and adding intricate colored patterns. The stream widens into a shallow pool, glassy and smooth, reflecting the surrounding trees in spotted, rippled patterns. Occasional water insects disturb the surface briefly, creating subtle, fleeting textures in the mirrored image. Trees rise, some lean in arcs above the path, others upright and strong. Bark is molted with age, lichen and moss, forming intricate textures that reward close observation. Roots twist and spiral above the ground in small networks, creating pockets of soil and moss and hidden plants beneath them. Light shifts slowly as clouds pass overhead, and shadows lengthen across the moss and grass. Small flowers, fungi, and tender shoots push through the leafy litter, delicate details in a living, breathing forest. Your path narrows and curves through densely packed trees, where trunks are twisted and gnarled. Fallen leaves and needles create a soft layer under your feet, textured with dampness and decay. Small stones and scattered twigs interrupt the path subtly, forming a mosaic of surfaces. The stream hurries slightly here, bouncing over pebbles and exposed roots. Reflections of branches shimmer and distort, and occasional insects come down to meet the surface. Tiny eddies form briefly around moss-covered stones before emerging into the main current. Sunlight falls in narrow shafts, highlighting the textures of the bark, the moss, and the leaves. Then vines spiral up trunks, delicate and intricate. Ferns and small plants peek through the undergrowth, and occasional flowers add subtle hints of color to the dense greenery. Birds call softly in the upper branches, and the animals move quickly beneath the trunks of the trees. Your path levels into a small clearing dotted with stones and moss patches. Grass grows soft and springy underfoot, interspersed with tiny flowers that catch drifting sunlight. The air smells faintly of wet earth and pine needles, carrying a subtle coolness from the stream nearby. The stream widens slightly. Water is clear and glassy, reflecting the arching branches above. Occasional ripples scatter light, while insects hover and move across the surface. Small stones along the bank glisten faintly, some covered with moss and tiny fungi. Trees rise around the clearing. Their trunks are textured, some with straight bark going up into the branches. Some twist and get rough and then smooth again as they're flecked and pieced together with lichen and moss. Thin vines trail along trunks and branches, and small plants curl delicately from soil and moss. Shadows stretch and recede across the clearing, shifting slowly with the movement of the sun. Small animals dart through the undergrowth. Leaves tremble in the breeze, and the stream's soft murmur fills the space. Your path winds into a dense grove of firs, their needles forming thick mats on the ground. Each step sinks slightly into the soft, spongy surface. Sunlight filters through the high branches in thin, uneven shafts, illuminating patches of moss and the occasional cluster of pale mushrooms. The stream narrows and tumbles over a series of tiny rocks, creating miniature waterfalls that scatter faint reflections of the trees above. Tiny droplets catch the light, sparkling briefly before merging with the water's flow. Tiny insects disappear into the greenery along the bank. Tree trunks vary in texture, rough, deeply fissured bark, smooth silvered surfaces, and scattered patches of lichen. Roots curl outward in intricate, natural patterns, forming irregular steps and small pockets where moss and ferns grow. Vines trail along the trunks, their delicate spirals adding subtle movement. A soft breeze rustles the needles above, carrying the faint scent of resin. Tiny leaves tremble in response, and birds dart quietly among the branches. Your path rises slightly onto a gentle slope, lined with sapperlings and ferns. Fallen leaves create a soft, irregular carpet beneath your feet. Their colors muted shades of amber, gold, and brown. Small stones and twigs interrupt the ground, providing tiny variations in texture and shadow. The stream runs parallel to your path. Water is shallow and clear, tumbling over smooth pebbles and tiny ridges. Reflections of the trees above shift constantly, broken by ripples from skimming insects. Soft murmurs of water blend with the distant rustle of leaves. Trees lean in arches over the path, their trunks textured with rough bark, patches of moss, and scattered lichen. Vines spiral delicately around the bases, while tiny plants and ferns push through the soil. Sunlight filters through the canopy, illuminating details that were previously hidden in the shadow. Birds and small animals move quietly through the undergrowth. Leaves tremble, pine needles scatter lightly, and tiny insects crawl over bark and moss. Your path curves into a hollow where the ground is soft with moss and thick fallen leaves. Tiny mushrooms cluster along the edge of roots and stones, their pale colors contrasting with the deep greens of the moss. The faint scent of damp earth rises with each step. The stream widens slightly here, forming small pools with glassy surfaces. Reflections of branches shimmer and break into delicate patterns with the occasional ripple. Tiny insects hover over the water, darting and skimming in irregular rhythms. The trees are oddly spaced, their trunks gnarled and twisted, with bark rough in places and smooth in others. Ivy vines climb delicately across trunks, and ferns unfurl slowly, their curling fronds catching the light. Light and shadow play across the uneven ground, shifting with the sun. Along the edges, Small flowers peek through moss and leaf litter, delicate and ephemeral. Birds flit silently among the branches, and a soft breeze rustles leaves in subtle waves. Your path rises gradually along a gentle incline, lined with young birch trees and clusters of ferns. The ground is uneven, scattered with small stones and fallen branches. Sunlight filters through the irregular gaps in the canopy above, creating thin shafts of light that highlight moss patches and tiny flowers. The stream moves quickly along the path, water slipping over smooth stones and around roots. Reflections of overhanging branches shimmer briefly before fading. Tiny insects skim the surface, their wings catching sunlight in brief flashes. The trees arch overhead, forming canopies that shift as branches sway. Bark textures vary widely, from rough fissures to smooth, silvery surfaces. Thin vines spiral along trunks, while small shoots and ferns push upward through the soil, delicate and intricate. Soft sounds fill the space, rustling leaves, a calling bird, the gentle ripple of water. Your path narrows into a dense patch where trees lean in arcs overhead. Fallen leaves and pine needles carpet the ground, softening each step and revealing subtle patterns in the texture and color. Small stones and roots rise slightly, adding irregularities to the forest floor. The stream runs beside the path, water clear and slow, winding around moss-covered stones. Reflections shimmer in broken patterns, disrupted by occasional insects moving across the surface. Tiny eddies form around the roots, creating delicate ripples that fade gradually. Trunks vary in thickness and texture, some smooth, some gnarled, and others patterned with lichen. Moss grows in patches, softening edges and adding depth to the base of the trees. Small plants push through the soil, curling gently and delicate as vines spiral upward. A bird song punctuates the quiet forest, and small animals move swiftly through the undergrowth. Leaves tremble in the soft breeze. Shadows shift slowly. Every surface starts to change. The path leads to a small rise, bordered by clusters of ferns and saplings. Soft sunlight filters through gaps in the canopy, illuminating patches of moss and curling leaves. Fallen twigs and needles scatter the ground, creating delicate textures beneath your feet. The stream widens briefly into a shallow pool, glassy and smooth. Reflections of branches and sky shimmer, broken occasionally by a falling leaf or a skimming insect. The water murmurs gently, harmonizing with rustling leaves. Trees rise irregularly around the path, trunks twisted and gnarled, some with smooth bark, others rough and fissured. Vines climb along trunks in thin spirals, and ferns unfurl slowly from mossy patches. Light shifts subtly with each movement of the sun and the wind. Soft sounds of distant birds, a gentle ripple of water, leaves trembling in the air, the shimmer of moisture on stones, the curl of tiny fern, the subtle pattern of light across bark. The forest is intricate, textured, and alive with quiet motion. Your path curves slightly downward, lined with thick moss and low shrubs. Fallen leaves carpet the ground in irregular patterns of muted amber and gold. Small stones and twigs provide subtle variations beneath your feet, catching the light in tiny highlights. The stream follows a winding course. Water is shallow and clear, slipping over smooth stones. Reflections of trees shimmer briefly, disrupted by occasional ripples from insects or falling leaves. Tiny eddies form around the roots and stones, scattering light in the soft patterns. The trunks are infrequently spaced, bark textured and spotted with moss and lichen. Vines climb delicately, curling upward in intricate patterns. Ferns and small shoots push through the forest floor, tender and curling. Shadows stretch and recede slowly with the movement of the sun. Your path rises onto a gentle incline where ferns cluster thickly and young trees sway slightly. The ground is soft, covered with fallen leaves and pine needles. Stones and roots provide subtle irregularities beneath your feet, creating a tactile, intricate surface. The stream narrows, flowing over smooth stones and under roots, creating delicate ripples that catch sunlight in brief flashes. Tiny insects skim the surface, glimmering for a moment before disappearing into the vegetation along the bank. Tree trunks arch overhead in different shapes and size. Bark is rough, fissured, or smooth, with moss and lichen adding soft textures. Vines spiral gently around the trunks, while ferns and plants push upward, delicate and intricate. The wind rustles leaves, creating shifting patterns of shadow on the moss and the stones. Small flowers peek from the undergrowth, while birds move quietly among branches above, forming a rich, textural forest tapestry. Your path descends slightly into a shaded hollow. Fallen leaves and pine needles create a soft carpet beneath your feet. Small stones and roots protrude here and there, offering subtle variations around you. Moss clings to the base of trees and the scattered rocks. The stream moves slowly, water shallow and clear, gliding over every stone and twisting around roots. Reflections shimmer in broken patterns. Tiny ripples scatter light and create faint, ephemeral designs. Trees rise at sparse intervals, trunks twisted, some straight, others with rough bark and smooth or spotted spaces. Vines climb delicately, spiraling upward. Ferns and small shoots push through the moss and soil, curling in tiny spirals. Soft sounds fill the space. Leaves tremble in the breeze. A distant bird calls. Echo. The gentle murmur of water. Your path curves along the side of a shallow rise, lined with young saplings and low ferns. Fallen leaves carpet the soft ground, interspersed with twigs and small stones that catch sunlight in tiny flashes. Moss grows in patches along stones and the bases of trees. The stream winds nearby, clear and smooth, rippling gently over small stones. Reflections of branches break into irregular patterns, and small insects skim the surface, leaving faint trails in the mirrored water. Trees arc overhead, their trunks textured with fissured bark, patches of moss, and occasional lichen. Vines spiral upward in delicate arcs. Ferns and shoots push gently through the soil, each leaf catching pale light. Soft sounds, birds cooing, leaves rustling, water murmuring, create a subtle, rhythmic background to the forest. Shadows shift with the sunlight overhead. The path rises into a small clearing, soft with grass and dotted stones. Sunlight filters through overhead branches, illuminating mossy patches, tiny ferns, and scattered leaves. Fallen twigs and pine needles add texture to the ground. The stream widens briefly. Water is glassy and clear, reflecting the silhouettes of the trees. Tiny ripples break the surface, erratic bursts, and stones are along the bank glistening faintly, some covered in gleaming moss. Trees rise in patterns above you, some leaning in arches over the path, others upright. Bark varies from rough and fissured to smooth and silvered, and dotted with moss and lichen. Vines spiral delicately, and small plants curl upward. Shadows lengthen and shift with the sun. Birds call intermittently. Leaves tremble gently, and each element, stone, the moss, the leaf, the bark, and the water, contribute subtle textures and movements to the forest. Your path narrows into a dense grove where trees arch overhead into irregular shapes. Fallen leaves, pine needles, and scattered twigs form a soft carpet beneath your feet. Stones rise slightly, adding subtle texture and variation. The stream runs alongside, clear and shallow, slipping around moss-covered stones. Reflections shimmer and distort with tiny ripples caused by drops of water moving along the stream. The water murmurs softly, harmonizing with distant rustles of the leaves. Tree trunks vary in thickness, size, and texture. Bark is rough, smooth, fissured, or silvered with age. Moss and lichen cling in patches, while ferns, seedlings, and other tiny shoots push delicately through the soil and the leaves. Light filters through gaps, forming ever-shifting patterns on the ground.